Hello, my name is Eric, and this is Daily Drivers, where we investigate whether or not various operating systems are seriously usable on a day-to-day basis. In my intro video to this series, I said that I wouldn't be dealing with BSD except for some edge cases. While that's mostly true, I still feel the need to do a video covering modern iterations of BSD, mostly to compare it to other operating systems, and older versions to a lesser degree. Before we go on, I want to say that I have very little experience with BSD. I installed Darwin early on in the history of Mac OS X, long before there was an x86 version of OS X. I've also installed 3 of the 4 main BSDs in the past with limited success. More recently, I installed TrueOS on a USB and used it, well, not at all. And then it got canceled. Story of my life. The BSD family is interesting. BSD, which originally stood for Berkeley Software Distribution, dates all the way back to Bell Labs' original Unix. BSD was the original third-party version of Unix, and it used the actual source code from Bell Labs. The whys and the hows of such a thing aren't really important to this video. All that matters is to bear in mind that BSD became the most successful Unix clone before Linux. The list of BSDs is somewhat complex, but in general it can be summarized as Original BSD, FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, Darwin and Mac OS, really, and other. The majority of BSD-derived systems were forked or otherwise derived from FreeBSD. Of interesting note is the system software for the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4 were both forked from FreeBSD with some NetBSD in the PS3 system for good measure. I'm going to gloss over the rest of BSD's history, in part because I don't know much about it, and in part because I don't really care. So, is BSD a good daily driver? The short answer is yes, maybe. As with every other system, it depends on things like, is there good support for your hardware devices? Are there apps that will do what you want? And for that matter, what do you want to do? To address those in order, let's look at hardware support. And there we have our first issue. Hardware support seems to vary, at least somewhat, between the different BSDs. NetBSD claims it'll run on pretty much anything, but is that true? I don't know. I can only speak to the hardware I have, and on my machines it seems to be pretty good. TrueOS works just fine on my machines without any configuration or whatever. Nomad BSD seems to work no matter which machine I try it on. I would think that on a modern-ish machine there shouldn't be any trouble. As for apps, there's plenty available for programming, writing, internet browsing, media browsing, etc. I'm not too sure about media creation, though. You'd have to dig through your chosen BSD's repositories, I suppose. And gaming? Pretty limited, I believe. Game producers don't write for BSD. The audience is just too small. Each version of BSD has its own distribution method, although I'm not too clear exactly how they work. Something of note is FreeBSD's built-in, but apparently optional, Linux compatibility layer, which is kernel-level support for Linux binaries, allowing most Linux binaries to run on FreeBSD. Wikipedia says it's not emulation. I'll have to take their word for it. Of course, Wine is also a thing, and there's supposedly a version available for FreeBSD and some of its derivatives, and Wine also works to varying degrees on other BSDs as well. Internet support is what you'd expect. For the most part, it just works. From a security standpoint, there's a lot to be said for BSD. At the very least, security through obscurity, although BSD isn't really obscure. And security is OpenBSD's entire point. It's raison d'etre. Although you can find criticisms of OpenBSD's methodology on Wikipedia and elsewhere. Having said all that, BSD is, in general, a good choice for a daily driver as long as you're not a hardcore gamer. And if you are, while BSD is good for all of your non-gaming tasks, who really wants to have to boot into a different OS just to play a AAA game? Gamers would be better off choosing Windows, Mac, or Linux. That about wraps things up for this episode. Stay tuned for the next episode where I'll be covering good old DOS. And won't that be interesting? If you liked this video, please thumb it up. If you didn't, it's the end of the video. Why are you still watching? If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section and I'll get around to answering them eventually, I swear. I'm always interested in suggestions on what OSs to cover. If you want to see me cover a particular OS, leave your suggestion in the comments section and I'll see what I can do. My name is Eric, and thanks for watching this episode of Daily Drivers.